Hey Adele. So on the 4th of July, I had some neighbors set off fireworks a few hundred yards from the field where my horse lives. Well, I don't think he's ever seen fireworks before, so as soon as he heard the popping and the crackling, he took off like a shot, and he was just drenched in sweat by the time I got out there. And my question is there anything using positive reinforcement that I can do to prepare him for situations like that? Or any way to just get him used to that type of stuff, but still using positive reinforcement? Thanks.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Willing Equine podcast. I'll be recording this episode in my car, so the audio may not be super clear, and sometimes I have my kids with me, so if you hear a little bit from them, I apologize, but hopefully you can still enjoy the podcast. I'd love to hear from you after you listen to the podcast, so feel free to comment on any of my social media platforms or email me or even send me an Anchor voice message. When we're working with horses, it's inevitable that there's going to be a time where, despite all of our best efforts and how hard we've worked to expose our horses to different stimuli, as far as like what's commonly called desensitizing, and how we can try our best efforts to make their environment low stress and to prepare them as much as possible, but it's inevitable that we're going to come across an event where it throws the horse over their fear threshold. So they're going to go from really relaxed and eating their grass or whatever it is, or working with you, and then their head's going to shoot straight up in the air. They're going to pause or freeze, and then they might panic and bolt or startle or start running or backing up or rearing or any type of response that would be in the fight-flight response. So either a fear response that's going to be a fight one, like kicking out, rearing, or similar behaviors to that, biting, or a flight response such as running, circling, maybe even like pacing. That would be a minor one where usually that's in a confined space, so you won't really see a horse pacing unless there's walls, so they're prevented from going anywhere. But that would still might be considered being put into a flight response. And also, even the circling too is usually at the end of a lead rope, and it's the horse being trapped and not being able to get away from you. They're tied to you, but they're still in a flight response. They're moving their feet very quickly or even just non-stop, but they can't leave you, so they're not just straight out bolting. So it's inevitable that we're going to come across a situation like this. We can't possibly prepare for everything, although we can certainly try. And some horses are more prone to being sent over fear threshold than others. Some horses are more confident and have been raised in such a way where they might startle for a second, they might like freeze really quick and then kind of jump back into it as far as, oh, okay, we're all good, and they just go back into work. This is a really common response for one of my horses, my filly River. She's been raised in such a way that I've always encouraged her confidence, and I've reinforced her for investigating things. For anytime something has worried her, I've always reinforced her for going towards it and being like, hey, what's that? So the most I will see her do is kind of do a freeze startle where they just splay out their feet real quick, and then she will maybe snort for a second, maybe even one time, and then boldly go towards whatever she's scared of. She will just hunt it down, to the point sometimes where I'm like, hang on, you can't actually go towards that thing. So some horses are more like that, and some horses are run and then ask questions, get scared first and then ask questions later. And these types of horses can be challenging sometimes because they what can start to happen is they work themselves into this panic, or they get scared, and then they just start running. And then how do you stop it? When these horses get into this frenzy where they just it kind of looks like they've just lost their mind. They're just running, making laps around the arena, or they've bolted and they're just ripping across the barn, or the pasture, or they're just fighting at the end of the lead rope and pulling. Sitting back is a really good example of this, where a horse is trying desperately to escape whatever it is that's scaring them, and they're restricted and they go into this panic mode, and it's like nobody's home. Like, you can't bring this horse out of this panic that they're in. Sometimes we try, a lot of people will try and bring a horse out of a panic like that through a form of punishment, so shouting at them or getting a whip out, telling them to knock it off, any form of punishment that would just like suppress the behavior. It'll just stop it dead in its tracks. We try this quite often to see if we can get the horse to stop, and usually these are an effort. Well, it can be done in effort because the behavior is annoying and we want it to stop, and you're actually trying to stop the behavior. But it also can be done in an effort to try and save the horse. So, horses that sit back, they're at high risk of breaking something, whether it's internally or externally, and we don't want that to happen to them. Being good caring horse people, we want our horses to be physically sound, and sitting back is not healthy for them and for their neck, for their head, for their muscles, anything. It's just not good. So what do we do though to try and stop this panic mode that the horses go into? And it's technically a fear response, so they're in an extreme fear response. Panic, when you're looking at the emotional systems based off of Panskep's work, panic is a different type of emotional state that has more to do with separation anxiety and being separated from companions, and abandonment. So we're actually looking at fear, the fear emotional state, and when a horse goes over a threshold like that and starts just being frantic, and we seem to completely lose their mind. And this is because they're in a survival state. They are doing whatever is needed to survive whatever is happening to them, and logic, as far as we're concerned, what looks illogical to us is not what's going to be going through that horse's mind. They're doing what's logical to them, which is escape or fight. And we often don't want to use punishment to bring horses out of this state. We don't want to have to be rough and to tell them, hey, knock it off, like, get your crap together. Like, we want to find a way to do this in a low stress way. We don't want to add to their stress. We want to be as positive as possible in our experience with the horse, and telling the horse that, we're here to be a source of reason for them and to get them through this situation. And we want them to trust us. And adding punishment on top of fear is not likely to create that relationship with your horse. So, but what do we do when the horse is already, food, clicker, they're so far beyond that state of mind that it is not likely to bring them back into training easily and bring their brain back and bring their response back to a calm, rest and restore state and learning state where they can function and process the information that we're giving them and to respond to cues and such like that. So what do we do? First is going to be keep your horse safe. So do what is necessary to make sure that you and your horse stay safe. This might mean that you involve pressure and release. This might mean you involve positive punishment, so an application of something aversive to the horse to suppress the behavior. If you have a horse that is trying to frantically bolt at the end of a lead rope, and if they were to get loose, they would run into the highway, you might need to yank that lead rope to make them stop temporarily, just briefly, so that you can use other methods to bring them back into a thinking, not thinking, but into a state where they can respond to you in a way that's more positive and less stressful and not going to involve punishment. So I try not to say a thinking state versus whatever other state they're in, because they're just not thinking how we want them to. They have just they've switched into survival mode. So they are beyond listening to a cue of touching a target. They're beyond all of that other stuff. They are in a state of mind where their survival is paramount, and they are going to do what it takes to survive. So in these situations, we will have to do what is necessary to keep them safe and to keep ourselves safe. And This is the only time that I will actively and consciously decide to use a form of punishment, because they are 1,000+ pound animal, and we are, 100, 200 pounds, and we do love them. And sometimes acts of love involve something that is not necessarily desirable temporarily to preserve life on either side so that we can fix the situation. So this is not a training solution. This is a survival situation. This is an emergency, severe emergency case situation. Ideally, we would have avoided the situation or seen it coming and starting to escalate, and would have started using other preventative measures first before having to be in this situation. But there are going to be situations where this happens. I had a situation happen with a mare a while ago. It was probably fall last year, and she was in a state of panic, like the actual emotional state panic, and was just so much, her mind had left me completely and was focused on getting back to her companions at all costs, to the point of hurting herself, hurting other people around her. She was not in a trainable state. And this was my fault because I put her in that situation. I put myself in that situation. This was completely a fault on me. It was not good planning. I put her in a place that she was not prepared for, training wise and emotionally and physically and mentally. And so the situation, the response, the outcome was not desirable in the least, and it put me in a lot of danger. I got caught between her and a fence, and all she knew was that something was restricting her from leaving, and that was the lead rope that I was holding on to. And so she started fighting at it, which happened to be attached to me, so double barrel kicking towards me. And I had to use all of my force and all of my might and all of my survival instincts for myself to bring her head around as quickly as I could and snap that lead rope as fast as I could to kind of shock her into standing still for a second so I could undo the lead rope or let go of it, or get her somewhere where I could unattach the lead rope so she could stay safe, so that I could get out of there. That was not a training situation. I was not training her that way. I was not demanding she respect me. I was not demanding that she, just get over her fear and get with the program and that I was the dominant one. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with survival for both of us. And then afterwards, after I got out of the situation and I realized the mistake I had made and the mistake I had put her into, the situation I put her into, and the whole thing just was one massive, terrible learning experience, but a needed learning experience. They always are. I started immediately training for protocol for a situation like that. Like, what happens if this mare who I knew had separation anxiety starts to panic? What do we do? Well, I had to establish a whole series of behaviors that would help her calm down when she started to escalate, and would create cues that were I had to create cues that were so strong and so well reinforced that she knew exactly what to do even when she's starting to escalate. So even when she was starting to worry about her companions, I could say, target this, or lead with me here, or do this. And she was like, oh, okay, I got this. And even though I can tell her brain is kind of like a little bit on edge, like she's starting to worry, we had built up such strong cues and such a trusting relationship that she's like, okay, I trust you. We're gonna, this is anthropomorphic here, but she's like, I'm gonna trust you. We're gonna go from point A to point B, and I know you're gonna get me back to my companions. I know you're not taking me away from them permanently. Like, it's all gonna be good. And also on top of that, I also made being with me more, I started working on making being with me more reinforcing than being with companions. So, being with me, you get lots of goodies, and we work on fun stuff, and I'm never going to take you too far away, to a point where you're uncomfortable or fearful. And then being with your buddies is fine too. You're fine to be with your buddies, but there's not all the good stuff that's with me. So that was definitely added there. So that's all to say that absolutely, when you're in a situation where it's life or death, where somebody's going to get hurt if the situation is not handled immediately, you will need to use some amount of force to stop the situation if possible. Now, like I mentioned before, the goal, good trainers, and this is what I strive to be this, in my opinion, good training, involves setting the horse up for success. So if you know your horse has separation anxiety, don't try leading your horse from the pasture to the barn for the farrier and then tying it there. That's just a recipe for terrible disaster. And then you're going to have to resort to this type of handling to preserve life, and it's not going to help the situation. In fact, on the backside, you're probably going to have an even stronger separation anxiety because being taken away from the buddies resulted in something unpleasant, and that just confirms that yes, leaving the buddies is a bad thing, a bad situation for the horse. Other things, if you have a horse that has struggles with leading and will lash out when being led or will bite or something like that, obviously, we don't put on the halter and lead rope and go walking on a long hike out in the middle of nowhere when we have a horse that we know when he starts to get scared or worried, starts lashing out towards the human. This is a situation that is not set up for success, and you're going to have to put yourself and that horse into a bad situation. Also, to add to this, just like I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, that there's things we can do to prepare our horses. We can try and expose them as much as possible to things that might potentially scare them. So if we know a holiday is coming up where we're going to have explosive fireworks, there are things you can do with positive reinforcement. And really what I like to use is a lot of classical conditioning. So when you start to associate something that might be frightening with something that's positive, there's a lot of other ways to do that too, where we basically, and this goes into the being a good trainer and preparing the horse for success, is spending time preparing our horses for things that we know are going to be startling for them and worrisome, and using things like systematic desensitization and counter conditioning and positive reinforcement are absolutely ways that we can do this for our horse. And I talk a lot about this on my website and blog that I'm going to provide links to. So that's the first, is trying to avoid those situations. But as we all know, you can plan and plan and plan and plan and plan some more, and things will still happen. So that's where having a repertoire of behaviors that are really solid, like your horse could be in full flight mode and sees that target and is like, oh, I'm supposed to target it, and will touch that target. Having those behaviors that well established is so important for helping horses come out of a fear state, for helping horses come out of a panic state. Some of my horses, actually that same mare that had the separation anxiety and all that, which she's doing 100% better on, by the way. Every once in a while we'll have a little flare up, but it's way, way better. I really worked on cone targeting. I got the cone targeting so solid that she could see a cone from a mile away, and she could be like worried about all the other horses and see that cone, and she's like, I'm going to the cone, and she will go to the cone, and then she will touch the next cone, and then the next cone, and then the next cone. And so it makes walking her from point A to point B when there's no buddies and she's stressed really easy, because I can just set a line of cones and send her from cone to cone to cone. And she, even though she's worried about the other horses, she knows we're touching the cone, and that really helps. Another situation you might be able to use that in is if you have a horse, let's say we've got fireworks going off, we've got, or crazy loud noises, maybe somebody's got a band, or I don't know what, some crazy noise that has your horse really worked up. You could choose that time, if your horse has a really solid targeting behavior, you could work on target practice during that time. So it helps focus the brain. It helps them go, okay, I know what we're doing. I can do this. This will be a good experience for me. It's all good. And it helps them really focus and stay distracted from that distraction, that fear, the stimulus that they're afraid of. So building up behaviors like that. Another one would be following a target. You could also mats, so teaching a horse to stand on a mat. Those are some good behaviors to teach to help refocus the horse when they're starting to get anxious. Another thing you could do is have a type of food or something that the horse is really enjoys, but maybe doesn't get all the time. So it's something that's kind of a special treat, but they can eat. You don't want it to be such a huge shock. Like, don't give your metabolic horse sweet feed. Don't do that, please. That'll just be even bigger issue. But, for many of my horses, I give them a little bit of alfalfa every day. And when we're going through a stressful time, maybe trailering, or we're in a stressful environment, there's stuff going on, or somebody, my family likes to skeet shoot, so shoot little clay pigeons nearby, and new horses that come in, that makes them a little bit worried. So I like to throw out some flakes of alfalfa, and they're like, oh, alfalfa, and they just beeline over to it and settle in and start eating their alfalfa. You can see that they're still a little bit worried, their head shoots up every once in a while, but eating in general calms horses. It keeps them in that rest and restore state, and it helps them calm down because they've got their head down on the ground and they're focused on eating, and it just helps soothe them overall. So encouraging them to eat, maybe take them over to an extra green pasture for a little while, give them a flake of alfalfa, choose their dinner time to be when it's going to be a stressful event. Maybe it's the Independence Day or some sort of special time of the year where everybody lights off fireworks. Choose that time to be feeding time, so they're eating their breakfast or their dinner, probably dinner, while the fireworks are going off. Or let's say that you didn't know that fireworks or something were going to go off, and you look out the window and your horse is running mad all over the pasture. What do you do? Like, how do you bring them back from that and help them calm down? That would be a perfect opportunity. I'd probably do two things. I'd try and figure out which one would work. I'd get some alfalfa real quick, and I'd go throw it out there, and usually that brings all my horses to a dead stop, and they start eating alfalfa. They could be absolutely losing their minds, and they see a flake of alfalfa, and they'll come to a dead stop and start eating. Or I will get some targets out or something like that and choose to do a training time during then, and that really helps them calm down. And you'll see, like in the beginning, they'll be really amped up and anxious, and then as the training session goes on, they'll start to calm down. You'll probably want to work with a really high rate of reinforcement at that point, lots of food, lots of clicks, just to keep them focused. Don't choose that time to work on a new behavior. Work on known behaviors, work on things that are calming, like head down, touching cones on the ground, mats. You can also try stuff like Tellington, so the T-Touch Tellington stuff, Linda Tellington Jones. She kind of made popular the idea of body wraps for horses and also dogs. And that can be soothing for some horses, helps them bring awareness to their body, and it brings their consciousness, like their brain, back to what their body is doing and how it's feeling. That's at least the idea behind it. And I've had good success with this when I have anxious horses, using body wraps to help them focus during training and being handled and such, and helps them calm down. So that's an idea as well. Making sure they have buddies nearby, another horse that's calm. If you can introduce a horse into the herd that is generally not afraid of much, that really helps the whole herd. It helps them calm down, because they'll just, like a youngster or a nervous horse will start running around the pasture, and then there's this steady Eddie horse that's been around the world a few times, and it's just standing there like, what are you doing, horse? Like, just stand here and eat your dang alfalfa. That will really help in more nervous horses to have a calmer, more confident horse nearby. And that's why I really like to work I match up my herds so that there's a mix of personality types. Most of them are pretty calm and relaxed, and if I have a nervous, anxious horse, eventually they'll kind of start to mold into the general herd mentality. And so I'll have a nervous horse that over time will become more relaxed, because the rest of the herd is not responding to the fireworks, is not responding to the gunshots, is not responding to the crazy tractors going by. And so they'll start to pick up from the other herd members that it's okay, that everything's good, we can be calm. So I hope this was really helpful and gave you some ideas of how to work with horses that are already above their fear threshold, that are already in a panic state, that need to, for their own safety probably, need to be helped soothed back into a calmer state of mind where they can focus and not be harm to other people and to yourself. Again, I really want to kind of drill in the fact that good training is the key here and setting the horse up for success. 100% all about setting that horse up for success. If you can't expect a nervous, anxious horse that is panicked leaving their buddies to tie inside the barn by themselves. You just can't. And you're going to end up resorting to punishment and being frustrated with your horse and somebody getting hurt. Really got to accommodate the insecurities and work with them while you're training to overcome them. So when the horse is panicked, when they're over their fear threshold, when they're already in that state of mind where they're in fight or flight or freeze, that is not a time to train. We're past the training stage. We have lost the training situation, the trainability of what's happening. The horse is not able to be trained in that moment. And at that point, it's what can we do for damage control? How can we bring this horse back into a state of mind where we can train and we can bring everybody into a safe place? Once your horse is already escalated to that point, it's all damage control at that point. And having really solid cues that are established with positive reinforcement, behaviors that have been over and over and over again reinforced so heavily, will really help with being able to have damage control without the use of punishment and pressure. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to find out more about The Willing Equine, head to my website, www.thewillingequine.com. On there, I have blogs and a very extensive FAQ. I also have other social media through there. So I've got YouTube and Instagram and everything else you could possibly think of. Also, I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to send me a message or an email, and I hope to hear from you soon.